from the Western mentality, to burn a book, generally speaking, is to show disrespect to it. But when you do this to the Qur'an, it is to make sure that nobody tramples on it or nobody throws it away. In other words, you get rid of it in a manner that will prevent its disrespect later on. Now, this was what was done, that all of the Qur'ans and all of the mushafs of all of the ummah were then taken and disposed of, and anybody who wanted a Qur'an had to copy it directly from the mushaf of Uthman ibn Affan, and that is why we call it the Uthmanic mushaf. All future Qur'ans, even up to our times, conform letter for letter, word for word with the Qur'anic mushafs. It was a drastic measure, but it was a necessary measure. And it is due to Uthman, it is due to the efforts of Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserved the Qur'an. To this day, there is no different version of the Qur'an. There is but one Qur'an. And this is due to the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He showered on Uthman ibn Affan. And this was done by the unanimous consensus of all of the companions at the time. Now, the Qur'ans at that time were written in a very ancient script. It is called Kufic script. And that script was not having dots or vowels on it. The dots and the tashkils were added later on, in the 2nd and 3rd centuries of the Hijrah. And this was done to facilitate the readings of the Qur'an. And it is narrated that the first person to add diacritical marks, i.e. what we call tashkil, the fatha, kasra, dhamma, the first person to do so was a person by the name of Abu al-Aswad ad-Du'ali. And Abu al-Aswad ad-Du'ali was a person who lived in the 1st century of the Hijrah, and a student of Ali ibn Abi Talib, and he used to add dots in specific places to take the place of fatha, kasra, dhamma. So he would put a dot below the letter if it was a kasra, a dot above the letter if it was a fatha, and a dot after the letter if it was a dhamma. And later on, people began to differentiate between the various letters of the Arabic alphabet. The early script of the Arabic alphabet did not have dots on the letters. So a fa and a qaf could only be told apart by context. And a ba and a ta and a tha could only be told apart by context. And a ha and a kha could only be told apart by context. Later on, people developed a more sophisticated script. And so, until our times, the most common script that we use is called the Naskhi script. Now, I wanted to show you some of the earliest copies of the Qur'an that we have that are still present in our times. And of the copies of the Qur'an that we have, if we can see on the screen here, if you can look at the screen now, it's coming on your screen, we have the copy of the Tashkent Mus'haf. Now, this Mus'haf, the Tashkent Mus'haf, it is one of the oldest Qur'ans ever preserved. And it is reputed to be one of the Uthmanic Mus'hafs, and it is preserved in Tashkent, which is a province in modern-day Russia. And if we see over here, this is a closer copy of it. We find that this is not paper as we know it, but rather leather. And the leather, or the vellum, has been placed on papers for our times, but this is the original script of the Uthmanic Mus'haf. We see here a facsimile or a photocopy version. This is how it was written. And if you notice, it is almost impossible for us modern-day readers to read this Qur'an, simply because the script has evolved. We need to notice here, over here, the lafz al-jalala word Allah. Here we have laha alaykum, for example. We notice certain words we can make out. Otherwise, generally speaking, it is very difficult to see and read this type of mushaf, because we are not used to seeing the script. Another version that we have, a close-up version of it, over here we see also a manuscript copy of the Tashkent version, which is reputed to be the version of Uthman. And here again we can make out waman, for example, over here. This is a noon, and there is no dot on it. And the reason is because there were no dots in the earliest manuscripts. Another early Mus'haf that we have is the Husayni Mus'haf, which is present in Cairo. And we notice this is also of the 1st century of the Hijrah, probably 40, 50 Hijrah written down. Look at how big it is. Why? Because this is real leather. It is not paper. It is leather. And it has been preserved to this day. And this is a Mus'haf dating back to decades after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, and these are the specialist curators that have been assigned to take care of it. To this day, this mushaf is present. We can see it and compare it letter for letter. Here is another mushaf that is found in Topkapi in Istanbul, and it is also a very early mushaf reported to be the Uthmanic Mus'haf. We see it closer over here, and the dots we see have a very different structure than our own dots. This too is the Topkapi Mus'haf. This is an example of a Mus'haf that was written around 80 or 90 Hijrah, and it is written in an early script in Yemen. It is called Al-Ma'il. And we can see it is a bit more easy for us, but still quite difficult for us to understand. And the last one that I wanted to show you, or the second to last, is this is the one that was commissioned by the famous Umayyad Caliph Al-Walid ibn Abdul Malik, and he commissioned this Mus'haf to be written for him. And this is the royal Mus'haf of the 1st century of the Hijrah. And the last Mus'haf that we show you is the very famous and beautiful Mus'haf called the Blue Qur'an, or the Blue Mus'haf, written on blue vellum, written with gold ink, with a lot of effort and a lot of money was spent on this. And this is also from the 1st century of the Hijrah. And this gives us some examples of the earliest Mus'hafs that were written, and they are available to this day. Anybody who wants to compare letter for letter and word for word, they can do so. The Qur'an indeed has been preserved from the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This leads us to the conclusion of today's episode. I hope you were interested in these Mus'hafs and manuscripts, and you can log online to various websites and see even more pictures. I hope to see you in our next episode. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
الله نزل أحسن الحديث كتابا متشابها مثانية تقشعر منه جلود الذين يخشون ربهم ثم تلين جلودهم وقلوبهم إلى ذكر الله